All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. If you're in Arizona, I'm sure being inside in the AC, if you've got that, is much better than being outside in that record-breaking October, which is just so much fun. So I will get us started and hand it over to Julie shortly. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mariana Pequot. I'm the Curator of Community Engagement here at the Tucson Museum of Art. Thank you all for joining us today for the Critical Eye, What Curators of Contemporary Art Look For. Before I turn it over to Dr. Julie Sasse, TMA's Chief Curator, I just want to touch base about a couple housekeeping items. First of all, thank you to all of you who have given a gift recently to TMA or has recently joined as a member or are a long-standing member. Welcome to all of our Arizona Biennial 2020 artists. We're thrilled you're joining us this afternoon. Just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording this. The program will be recorded for our archives. Some or all of the recording might appear publicly to be shared at a future time. Our connection quality, hopefully you don't have any issues with that, but if your connection seems poor or you see a blank screen at any time during the presentation, try to leave the meeting and re-enter. This often solves problems, especially those that occasionally occur where we might be transitioning through screen share. We are going to open for Q&A to the public after the talk and Julie's questions to our lovely presenters. Please plan to submit all of your questions through the chat function. To open that chat window, click the button that says chat, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. And then this should open up your chat window to the right of the presenter view. We're really looking forward to your questions. We will plan to transition to those about 3 o'clock and no later than that. Hopefully we didn't just lose the panelist, but oh, there she is again. Okay, sorry, taking me out, Miki. Anyway, now without further ado, again, welcome to everybody who's joining us today on this Zoom webinar, and I will turn it over to Dr. Julie Sasse for the duration of the program.
Thank you very much, Mariana. I have to say, I am so excited about this particular year. Not only is this the year from hell for most of us, but this is my 20th year at Tucson Museum of Art. And I did some checking, and this is the 40th year of the Arizona Biennial. We've had annual or regular juried invitationals or exhibitions as early as 1948, but the official Arizona Biennial started in 1980. So this is amazing that we've continued to maintain this wonderful tradition. And I can tell you that from the wonderful response we've had from the artists who are participating this year, it's getting better and better over the years. So very excited about this. And this one is my 10th biennial and my 10th Critical Eye panel. So I'm very happy to be a part of it. First, oops, I think I thought my phone was off. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. First, I'd like to thank James and Louise Glasser for being the TMA exhibition season sponsors. I'd also like to thank James and Fran Allen, Alice and Paul Baker, Mary Jo Brown, Connie Hillman Family Foundation, Michael and Beth Kasser, Ann and Ed Lyman, Jean Pickering and Mike Andrew, the TMA League, the Contemporary Art Society, the Latin American Art Patrons, and the Western Art Patrons. Most importantly, I'd like to thank my dear friend Joe Baker. We were doing a little reminiscing earlier, and I can tell you that this was exceptional on many levels. Due to COVID, we, for the first time, did this over Zoom, and we were able to do a phenomenal job considering because we were operating on new technology, but I think that Joe did a tremendous job and we have a spectacular exhibition. I'd like to also thank our other panelists who are with us today. Erin Joyce from the Heard Museum, raise your hand. There we go. And Miki Garcia from Arizona State University Art Museum, and I'll introduce them in greater length shortly. As I mentioned, the Arizona Biennial is the longest running juried invitational in Arizona and one of the most anticipated exhibitions in the state, as well as this panel. It serves as an opportunity for the public and curators to see selections of some of the most interesting works being produced in the state. Of course, the world has changed a lot since we had our last panel on the subject, so we did adjust some of our questions. And primarily, I'd like to have everyone talk about how these changes have affected the art world and their curatorial field in particular. Over the years, I've tried to select the jurors that show a commitment not only to what's happening in the country and the world in the way of contemporary art, but also have a vested interest in the artists living in the Southwest. I've tried to alternate regions and gender, and my goal is to make sure that we have different perspectives each time. But my goal is increased lately to make sure that we have a more diverse juror pool so that our voices and perspectives even grow greater over time. So this is a wonderful start to that. And in addition, while we don't look at the artist names or their backgrounds, it's the art itself. Our juror picked a wonderfully diverse and thought-provoking exhibition. So I think you're going to be impressed when you have a chance to come down. We had more than 493 artists entering, more than 1,350 entries, and it covered all media. We ended up picking 91 artworks, and it covered installation, painting, sculpture, video, photography, textiles, and works on paper. And all told, 91 artworks, but 86 artists, and they came from all over the state, but primarily Tucson and the Phoenix area, but every area, every region is represented. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we'll start with some images and some questions. First, we have our Arizona Biennial 2020 juror, artist, educator, curator, and director Joe Baker. Raise your hand. There you go. An enrolled member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma. He currently serves as the executive director of the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center in Mashantucket, Connecticut. And he's the co-founder and executive director of the Lenape Center in New York City. In New York, he led the commissioning of an original opera for the Lenape Center called The Purchase of Manhattan, created by composer Brent Michael Davids, and it was performed in the sanctuary of the original church of the Dutch colony, Collegiate Church. Prior to his move to the East Coast in 2019, he was the CEO and executive director at the Palos Verdes Arts Center in Ranchos Palos Verdes, California. There he created innovative new programming, professionalized art exhibitions, and the school, and expanded outreach to communities in need throughout Los Angeles County. And prior to that time, he served as the executive director at Longview House and Gardens in New Orleans, which is a historic estate and gardens, where he supported contemporary artist interventions and commissioned an original opera. He also, as if that wasn't enough, has worked at Arizona State University's Institute for Design and Arts, serving as their first director for community engagement, and he created interdisciplinary partnerships. At the Heard Museum, in addition to everything else he's done, he was the Lloyd Kiva New Curator of Fine Arts, where he pioneered new opportunities for emerging and underrepresented artists through innovative international exhibitions and programming. His recent work addresses issues of identity and global cultural equity. He's won the Virginia Piper Charitable Trust Award, the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of the American Indian Design Award. He's received ASU's Presidential Medal for Social Embeddedness and the Joan Mitchell Foundation Award in Painting. Next, I'd like to introduce Erin Joyce. Joyce has worked as an independent curator and journalist in New York, London, Dubai, Dallas, Santa Fe, and throughout Arizona and California since 2010. Her focus as a scholar and curator is on contemporary, indigenous, and North American art, as well as contemporary Middle Eastern and North African art, with sub-focuses on inquiry-based practice and social justice. Joyce has served as a consultant for South by Southwest and was a special projects editor at Good Magazine and served as the inaugural art editor for Aslan Media, Inc., a media platform offering alternative coverage of the Middle East and its global diaspora communities. She's also a contributor to Hyperallergic, Salon, Novus Journal, Shift, Canvas Magazine, and content writer for Modern Art Iraq Archive, and was the 2019 Rabkin Prize nominee. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in the History of Art from the University of North Texas, studied contemporary art at Sotheby's Institute of Art, London, and holds a Master of Arts in Museum Studies from Johns Hopkins University. Her exhibitions have received attention in such publications and media outlets as Vogue, NPR, Hyperallergic, Queen's Chronicle, the Art Newspaper, and the New York Times. Joyce joined the Heard Museum in the fall of 2017 as Fine Arts Curator. And Miki Garcia. Garcia was appointed director of the Arizona State University Art Museum in 2017. Previously, she was the executive director and chief curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara from 2005 to 2017. Prior to that, she worked at the Public Art Fund in New York, and from 1999 to 2001, she was a curatorial associate at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and has also worked at the Blanton Museum of Art at the University of Texas, Austin, and the San Antonio Museum of Art. At the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, she worked with numerous emerging as well as internationally recognized artists, including Sanford Biggers, Michelangelo Thomas, and Tam Van Tran, among many others. She's also completed numerous scholarly and professional publications and has taken part in juries and guest lectures, including Artadia, the Fund for Art and Dialogue, Creative Capital, the Santo Foundation, and the National Endowment of the Arts. Garcia has a Bachelor of Arts from Vassar College and a Master of Arts from the University of Texas, Austin. That's enough to humble anyone. I think that introduction is pretty overwhelming. So first, I'd like to have you each take a short amount of time to show some images and share just some basics about your past and perhaps current projects, and then we'll go on to some questions. So Joe, why don't you take it from here?
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. We're just going to move through these images quickly. All of the work that you'll be seeing are curated exhibitions of mine at the Palos Verdes Arts Center in Rancho Palos Verdes, California. Next, please. This is an exhibition of historic textiles, partnering with Amati Brothers in West Hollywood. Next. I was really interested in pairing the textiles with architectural pottery from the mid-century. Next, please. This is an exhibition of the architect David Reinhardt, who designed the east wing of the Salt Institute in La Jolla. This is really one of the last exhibitions for this person, as he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So he was in the mid to late stages of Alzheimer's when we were able to open this exhibit. Next, please. I Love My Dog, which was a complex partnership with the American Kennel Association, Museum of the Dog, Lisa Setta Gallery in Arizona, with the William Wegman Prince, and then a partnership with Harbor College, where architectural students designed very innovative dog houses. Next, please. Next. We also commissioned Doug Meyer to do a special artist dinner, who created this very submersive dining area for the artists who were invited to the opening. Next, please. The work of Japanese artist Minoru, these amazing constructions of wood. It's a downtown Los Angeles artist. Next. Again, Minoru's work. Next, please. And then because our building was really ugly, we decided that we would do a national call for design so that we could wrap the building, the exterior of the building, with imagery, which we did. And this is the work of Deb Stoner, who is an artist who lives and works in Portland, Oregon. Next, please. Worked with Cuban artist Angel Ricardo Rios where we also commissioned an opera in Havana. Next, please. Also, that partnership extended with the work of Ivan Wong, who was a Hawaiian artist of Hawaiian descent, who had done these amazing surfboards, which we installed not in the gallery, but in Paul Smith on Melrose Avenue. Next, please. Again, the surfboards. Next. And then because we were in Los Angeles, we had the opportunity to exhibit the work of celebrity photographer Douglas Kirkland. And it was an amazing experience. The man is still working in his late 80s. Next, please. And then working in a partnership with Carla Fernandez, a Mexican fashion designer based in Mexico City. We partnered for her runway show with the Heidi Duckler Dance Theater in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mariana, next slide. Our next curator, Erin, will you speak about some of your projects? And then staying with Mariana, we'll move the slides.
Of course. First of all, thank you so much, Julie and Mariana, for inviting me to be on this panel and for that generous introduction. I really appreciate being asked to participate. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This was an exhibition that took place in New York in a project space in Long Island City. And it was a sort of three-part exhibition that traveled from New York to the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe and ended at the Museum of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff. Next, please. This is part of an ongoing public art installation run by Leo Kelbs in Brooklyn, New York. It's called Light Year. And so I've actually participated a couple times as a guest curator. And this took place in the summer of 2016. And the work you see in that image is actually of a Tucson-based artist, Samal Shaibi. Other artists were Stephen Yazzie, Basmal Sharif, and Nicholas Galanin. Next slide, please. This was part of Spring Break Art Show. And this took place when they moved the art show to a building in Times Square. So it was a solo exhibition of an American artist named Andrew Erdos. Next slide. This was actually my first project here at the Heard Museum. We worked with Cheyenne River Sioux artist named Cheyenne Randall, and he came and did a 2-week-long residency here at the museum and produced, I think there were 7 monumental wheat paste murals. So the one you see here is of Sade. Next. This exhibition was last summer. It was a solo installation by Raven Chacon. So it was a light and sound installation that was featured in one of the galleries here at the museum. Next, please. This exhibition is currently up. It's the first in a series that we've started here at the museum to give monographic exhibitions to contemporary Indigenous women artists. So the inaugural artist in that series is Maria Hutfield, and this is looking at about 9 years of the artist's practice while she was living and working in Brooklyn, New York. And next, please. And this exhibition is also currently up. We just opened it here at the museum about 3 weeks ago. And it's a group exhibition of 24 artists. Oh, Julie's holding up the catalog, thank you. 24 artists working across the United States and Canada in various mediums and modalities. So here there are 2 bodies of commissioned work, the earrings that you see suspended by Eric Paul Riege, and it's kind of hard to see in the photo, but those arches are site-specific work by Ian Kuali'i. Next slide, please. And here's just another installation view. You see work by Jeffrey Gibson, Kara Romero, Chinupahan Skaluger, and Brad Kalhammer, and you can kind of see a little glimpse of Meryl McMaster in the back.
And just to give a shout out to Brad, I see you're logged on. So hi, Brad.
Oh, hi, Brad. I also have like a poster of Brad behind me. So there's a lot of Brad going on. Next slide, please. And this is another installation shot from the exhibition. On the left, you see a television monitor with a collaborative work by Laura Ortman, Jock Soto, and Nonable Becker. And then in the other part of the image, you see 2 works by Mike Patton. And I think that's my last slide. Yes.
Okay. Next up, we will have Miki talk about her work. And hi to Brad. We are going to be doing a solo exhibition of Carl Hammer's work in 2022. So we're pretty excited that we're all sharing our artists in the state. Miki.
Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks Julie for asking, and Mariana for being such a great organizer. My tack is a little different only because I'm the director. I am curating one of the shows that you'll see in the slides here, but I decided because I'm the director, I would show you images that are coming up in the museum schedule. So if you could go to the next slide. This is actually our first show that's up. It opened, it was due to open the week we went into hiatus in March, and we finally were able to show it to the public in July when we opened. And so this is Tania Candiani. It's a solo show of the Mexican artist that is a second part of a 2-part series that we have worked with her. And this, For the Animals, was a commission that we did. She worked with Julio Morales, our curator, and was in residence for 5 years working on this exhibition that's site specific. Next, please. In our Ceramics Research Center, we also have Toshiko Takayasu up and available. This is an artist that grew up in Hawaii, was born in the 1950s, and worked in fiber, bronze, but also very much in clay, and all of the works are from our permanent collection, and it's just a gorgeous show. We just had a beautiful Zoom opening with people from all over the world logging in. Next. This is a response to Black Lives Matter and COVID. Our curators decided that they wanted to keep an adaptive and responsive gallery and set of exhibition programs and interventions that they would do for the entire year, starting in September. And among them are films, outdoor screenings, projections, sound interventions, and other things that will be taking place throughout the year that are responding directly to the events that are happening and developing before us. Next slide. We have a gallery called Art in Focus where we always present works from our exhibition, and we try to look at them anew and sort of critique the notion of collections. But in this particular suite, we're highlighting women in the collection, from Betty Saar, Faith Ringgold, Fanny Nampayo, Carmen Lomas Garza, some really outstanding works from our permanent collection in that exhibition. Next. We'll also be featuring in December Restless Balance by the collective Boredom Research, which are the British artists Vicky Isley and Paul Smith. They worked with the ASU Biodesign Institute and the Arizona Cancer and Evolution Center at ASU to be in residence and create this exhibition, which is looking at pandemics and viruses and all sorts of timely thematics. Next. We'll also be organizing and presenting a solo exhibition, a mid-career survey of the Phoenix-based artist Liz Cohen. It's going to be work from her early years where she worked in a car shop for 10 years and apprenticed there, and took this East German Trabant car and converted it into sort of an El Camino lowrider style. She's dealing with all kinds of notions of hybridity, including her own identity as a Colombian, Syrian, Jewish, American, Phoenician, and where a woman and where one fits into that. And we'll also, next slide, we'll also be presenting a public artwork by Leo Vyarial in November. It's a site-specific exhibition that is in part inspired by his time at Rodencrater, but also he took a 3D scan of the Predoc building and is creating, with all that data, is creating an immersive public art sculpture which is due to open in the fall, and we're very excited. Next. We're also working on Jose Clemente Orozco and really looking at the final stage of the artist's career, and many of the works are from the family's collection. We collaborated with the son and grandson of Orozco to present works that look at the artist's themes that persisted through his entire life. And then two more. This is a next exhibition called Dinnerware at the Ceramics Research Center, looking at everything from celebrating food and rituals to insecurity and hoarding when it comes to food and material objects. And lastly, in September 2021, the curators, myself included, 4 of us have been working on an exhibition called Undoing Time, Art and Histories of Incarceration, with 12 artists who are critiquing and the legacy of the way that incarceration has been imagined and visualized in art history in particular, but in visual history. And this is from a grant from Agnes Gunn's Art for Justice Fund, where she, I don't know if many of you know, she sold her Roy Lichtenstein for, I think, $300 million or $100 million to create a fund to end, to eradicate mass incarceration. And so this is a project that stems from that endeavor. And I think that's it.
Thank you. So we'll look at a few of the biennial slides while I ask questions, so you'll have some new visuals. Today's socio-political climate is obviously highly complex, but it's also an exciting and meaningful time. For instance, TMA has made a commitment to the institution-wide IDEA plan, which encompasses inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And I would like to ask each of you, and some of it's already borne out in your images, how important is it to you that your institution address these principles, and how are you planning to do it? Do you think that art is more interesting in this time of political and social upheaval, and how do museums play a role in addressing that? So let's start with Joe, and then you can raise your hand and jump in when he's said his piece.
Thank you. I work for a tribally owned museum today, which makes my situation a bit different than it has been in the past. But I think diversity, is critical to an informed public. And we as directors, we as curators have a responsibility to the larger communities that interface with the museum. So diversity, equity, these are all issues of great concern, not without challenges in our current system.
Erin, would you like to address
Absolutely.
next?
I completely agree with what Joe is saying. I mean, I think that museums do have a tremendous responsibility. These sort of colonial frameworks that museums are, how do you sort of undo some of that and create new space for diverse voices? So to answer sort of the latter part of your question, do you think that art is different or more exciting in these moments? And I'd have to say that I think that these moments are sort of always happening. I think these conversations are always happening. Maybe they're just not always in the foreground, or maybe not on the evening news in the same way that they are now. But I don't think that these are necessarily new conversations. They're just amplified more. So I think that there's maybe a little bit more synergy happening that people can see more readily. But I'd say that art and artists and their relationships with curators are beholden to these ideas of equity and diversity and inclusion and access, and what communities are we in, what communities are we engaging with, and how are we accountable to those communities.
Sounds good. Miki?
Well, thanks for kicking us off with a question that's so timely. Of course, especially as coming to this question as a director, and what I find, the question is, of course, the equity, diversity, inclusion, and access are incredibly important. but we've always known that, and still nothing has really changed. I think that from the point of view of a director, I realized that it's not really about an EDI strategic plan or how many people you hire. That's great. Those are all incredibly important steps, but really it's about systemic change. It's about how an institution business model and vision and mission really see themselves. It's about how the personal accountability of the people that work at museums and volunteer at museums, what they have to issues of social justice. So I find that sometimes museums will produce really great exhibitions or programs or educational programs, and that's really where most of the diversity will take place in the form of outreach, whether it's on the gallery walls or an educational program. And that's still a form of noblesse oblige, as far as I'm concerned. The power really remains in certain spaces. And so until we really talk about what social justice means and how museums are not really apart from society, but woven into the fabric of society, we won't really move too far along in these conversations.
That's true. You know, I think a lot of people are artists in particular, of course, are worried that if their art isn't political, in that term that's perhaps overused, that their work isn't relevant. But it really isn't about being political art. But can you address that notion of political art? What is political art? And is there room for abstraction or work that is not about a current front page issue? Because I've seen a lot of beauty and a lot of poetic reverie that can address the same issues without smacking of politics.
I'll start. I mean, I think that whether something is abstraction or not, it's really about privilege and what privilege one person has to be free to do something that's abstract versus another artist not having the privilege and having to communicate for themselves or their communities. So whether the work itself, the material work, alludes to a political phenomenon or a current event, it is coming from a politicized position because everyone has a position in their society. So if they're privileged enough to not have to worry about that, that is political, in my opinion.
Well, I would add, I completely agree with that. And I would add, just for example, on a project that I worked on with Raven Chacon for his solo show last summer here at the museum. You know, many people were talking with him when he was here at the opening, and we had an artist conversation with him. Of course, this was prior to the pandemic, and we still had in-person events. But some people were asking him about the work, and the work is, we had an image of it on the screen a few minutes ago. It's a series of speakers suspended from the ceiling, and then the room sort of changes color throughout the day, sort of referencing sort of the four sacred colors, and also the sound that you hear is a Dene woman speaking the Dene origin story, and it's sort of set up on a time repeat, so it starts from the bottom speaker and echoes throughout the gallery. And people were asking him if he views this work as political, and he said, just by me being, you know, a living Indigenous person and having this in this space, it's political because it's my existence is resistance, basically. And he's, you know, these communities have survived, you know, these colonial frameworks, these genocidal frameworks for centuries. And he, you know, this idea of survivance is there, and he's here, and he's telling these stories, and this story of origin for his community. So it's, you know, that idea of a continuum. So I agree with Miki that it does have so much to do with who that person is and what their privilege level is or isn't, and how they're making that work, and what spaces it takes up.
I think the other side to that discussion is honesty, how we honestly express ourselves in a society that bombards us with information continuously, both positive and negative. But I still think there's room for beauty and that pure expression of beauty. There's room for that, and it can come from a very honest place. in your experience?
Okay, I'll take another shift here, but still a timely one. As we all know, the whole world is facing fiscal, social, and public health challenges, but particularly for institutions. But if you could each mention something that's become new or some new opportunity that's come about as a result of all this. And of course, this Zoom meeting right now is one example, but let me know if there's something special that's come about because of these situations we're all in.
Well, I think from my perspective, what's new, and I say this with caution because I think, virtual presence is important as the way we're communicating today, but there's also a certain fatigue factor to that. But what's new for me is, and it's very much the way I like to work in my practice, is collaboration, partnerships, reaching into the community to realize specific goals, which we may have been able to express singularly with more ease in the past. But I have a sense that there's this growing need to connect on a community level, which to me is a very positive directional move.
I have to jump in because somebody did ask an interesting question that's pertinent to this. Because we're so bombarded with the news 24 hours a day and everything is doom and gloom, how much do museums have the opportunity to embrace just the sheer notion of escapism? Can we allow that in this time? I know people are very happy to come to our biennial. They're just happy to be out and looking at art in the flesh. But do you see any of that, the possibility of just pure enjoyment of being in the museums?
I mean, I would have to say that, yeah. I mean, while not all artwork is, lots of artwork is a reflection of the society we live in. So it's not all going to be sort of edifying in that kind of escapist way. But I do think that what all museums do have is interconnectedness and an ability to draw empathy. And especially in these times when we are so alone and there are such, it's so radical in the way that, media is presented to us, and there's so much sort of opposition, that museums can be these spaces where maybe the art can be challenging, but the space itself, the practice of viewing, the practice of collective empathy and understanding is in some way healing.
I definitely agree. And I think also just this idea of like a time scale. I feel when you come to a museum, even if there's like time-based media in exhibition, it's a slower process of consuming information than us being on our digital devices or on our laptops or on watching the news, where, like you said, Julie, it's this constant stream of information. And I think that, when you go to a space like a museum or a gallery or a project space, it gives you this moment to slow down and take in and look longer at something and consider something. And like Miki said, the work may be challenging, but it gives you this opportunity to process it at a different time scale that I think is really important for people.
It might have a lot of bearing on the idea that artists reflect on what we're all absorbing. So we're getting to see someone distill it in a way that, is through beauty or through an artistic lens. So that really does kind of help us decipher all this information that we're getting. I'd like to ask a little bit about what was your aha moment as curators or art professionals, if you remember any one particular exhibition or artwork that you saw, whether it was early on in your life or later as your career grew, that perhaps inspires or informs your current practice. Do you have any of those inspirational memories that changed everything or made you know you wanted to be a curator?
Well, I have one. And that memory is from my childhood at 10 years of age at the Nelson Atkins Gallery in Kansas City, where I escaped from the grade school tour that I was on and encountered Monet's Water Lilies. The vast scale of that sucker just baffled me. And I remember that that distinctly because, you know, the teacher in charge was looking for the missing kid, and that was me, who was lost in a gallery. And I thought, wow, this is so unbelievably confusing to me that I really, you know, I gotta know something more about this because I love the visceral quality in paint and sort of the blurring realities that I experienced. I'd never seen anything like it because I was a kid growing up in a small town in Oklahoma. So that was, for me, exceptional.
Erin or Miki, do you have any of those aha moments?
Do you want to go first, Miki, or?
I'll be brief, and I'll try to be brief. I went into the family business, as it were. My parents are artists and educators. So I don't know if there was one aha, but certainly the foundation of everything is my family traveled every summer because they were educators. They had 3 months off. We went to Mexico City and we went to Houston. 2 summer trips that we took, annually. And so whether it was the murals of the murals of Diego Rivera at the Presidential Palace to going to the Menil collection and going to the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and seeing my dad's favorite artists were Paul Klee and Max Ernst. So, I mean, that was just how I grew up, and I rebelled and never thought I'd find myself art career, but it just was, it's part of my DNA.
Wonderful. Erin?
Well, sort of the same. I mean, I always grew up around the arts, and, you know, both visual and performing. Prior to being a more of an art history nerd, I was a dancer. So my artistic pursuits were more in the performing side of things than the visual side of things. But I would have to say, when I was an undergraduate at the University of North Texas, I had a professor who was very important to my development as a thinker and as a scholar. Her name was Nada Shabuz. She still is a professor at North Texas, and sort of a very prominent leader in scholarship surrounding modern and contemporary Arab art. And I took one of her graduate seminars when I think I was like in my senior year, and it just was such an important foundation for me. And she handed me the book, Art in the Age of Terrorism. And it was really that aha moment of looking at how artists are interpreting the world around them, and not, especially in that text, it wasn't necessarily about interpreting through beauty. It was really confronting head on the issues that were still happening in the Middle East, and for artists from the Middle East and North Africa. And she also is Dr. Shabuz is also a curator as well as a scholar. So she's curated shows at the Mataf in Doha, Qatar, and, you know, sort of all over. So I think her career really inspired a lot of what I did. And I just felt very lucky to have like a strong female presence like that in my education, to show me how you can also have this hybridized career as both an academician and as a curator and as a writer, and you know, sort of hitting all those things.
And of course, in the case of Joe, also a practicing artist. I don't know if Miki or Erin started out as artists, but I did. And, you know, to me, it helps to have been an artist because I understand how difficult, you know, being a creative maker of objects and have them matter is a huge undertaking. And also I understand media better, but I think it's not a necessary prerequisite, but I think it's certainly helped me to have that background. I'd like to ask, the elephant in the room is that we live in Arizona, and for the most part, you know, Arizona is still considered isolated. And Joe, you've been in Arizona before. Now you're in what you have admitted is somewhat of a isolated area as well. How much do we all feel the need to make sure that our regional artists not calling them regional, but artists who live in this area, that they get noticed and exhibited and heard, at the same time making sure that we've addressed our audiences to make sure that we're bringing in the outside to the isolated area. So how much does that notion of regional art or being a regional museum enter into your curatorial practice? Is it a challenge, or is it a negative or a positive? Joe, do you want to start that one?
You know, I spent 30 years in Arizona, living in the vast, remote desert. And I, I don't know that I ever thought of it as regional, because I think, you know, we today are very connected. We're connected globally. Our reach is phenomenal. So while there is specific work that is informed by the physicality of the elements, the landscape, the environment, the weather, we're all responsive to that. And in each region, there's a unique quality. I remember being in North Carolina and being in the green swamp and being in this canopy of trees that, you know, is vastly different than the experience of being in Arizona with the great expanse of sky. And that does inform your work. It does, you know, it finds expression in what you do as an artist. And I think it's important to celebrate those qualities that surround us, knowing full well that it's not a handicap, because we are easily connected to all the big urban centers.
So you don't think that an artist needs to be from New York or Chicago or LA to be looked at as relevant?
The advantage to that is that you have access. You have access to the curators, you have access to the galleries, you have access to the museum, you have access to the patrons. It's a little different challenge in the more remote areas.
I think that's a good point, is that there is a certain level of density in the art worlds of Los Angeles or New York, where there are hundreds of galleries and, you know, dozens of major museums, whereas, you know, here, especially in Phoenix, or even in Tucson, there are, you know, a few sort of major museums and not as many galleries. There's just not that same sort of critical mass that you get in those larger urban centers. But I would also echo that I don't think it's a handicap. I remember being at, it was like an art opening or something several years ago, and someone had asked me, you know, what do you do? And I said, I'm a curator. And they're like, oh, like, you should live in New York. You should move to New York. And I always just kind of thought, like, why? Like, I mean, I guess, but, you know, I think that it's that idea, that sort of myth that you have to live in New York to make it as an artist isn't necessarily true. I mean, even in the exhibition we have downstairs right now, I think only 2 artists out of the 24 live in New York. The rest of them live across the United States and Canada, many of them not in major urban centers, but they have major contemporary art careers. So I don't think it necessarily matters, especially in this globalized age, where you are, because your
Most
work
artists
does
are in the air more than they're
on the ground.
I would echo at what Erin is saying and what Joe is saying, but, you know, what Erin is saying is that there is an art market. I mean, there is a definite art market that is based in centers, London, you know, these days Dubai, you know, LA, New York. And I think the trick, if one is a regional artist, is to be making sure that their work is circulated, and usually galleries are the ones that circulate that work, and that the work is regional, but it's also in conversation with the global dialogues that are happening in our world. And I think that's a really important thing. But I'm an outsider. I've only lived in Arizona for 3 years, and I have lived on both coasts, and have been very near the centers and in the centers professionally. And what I can say is that, like, my time in, you know, I started to live in New York in the early 90s, and and lived in California just before I moved here. And in both cases, I just look at those cities and look at the price points of how much it is to have a studio there or an apartment. And there just won't ever be a CBGB's. There won't ever be an East Village. There won't ever be a Venice Beach anymore because artists can't afford to live there. Artists like to be fugitive. They have to live in spaces allow for them to have space and affordability. And those coasts are not presenting opportunities for artists. They're all in the Catskills now, or they're all, and
they're
what
upstate.
what we're looking at now is what I find so exciting about being in Arizona now. This is, I feel like the best time is that we are seeing this emergence of second cities, if you will, Detroit, New Orleans, Phoenix, Portland, cities that are really where people, where artists would have left because they would have gone to LA or New York because it was cheap to be in the East Village or whatever. Now they're staying here and they're they're creating work from a very sort of specific place. And it is not like every other work in the world, and that in it of itself is a really exciting time. So my curatorial, my visits aren't necessarily always to New York. Sometimes they are to Detroit. I want to go to the New Orleans Biennial more than I want to go to the Whitney Biennial. It's just interesting. So I do think that Arizona is part of this kind of reemergence of these other kinds of cities. Cleveland, where people can make great food, great poetry, great music, great art that is really connected to place, as long as it's being circulated, that artists have a conversation and a global community. That's, I think, the bridge.
Sounds good.
Absolutely agree.
So what excites you today? What are you looking for when you are forming exhibitions, or in some cases, some of you collect? What in particular is exciting in this day and time? And I think some of the slides have borne this out, but see if you can identify some of the trends or the particular artists that you think are doing outstanding work. And then later, Joe, the next question will be for you, what stood out in the Arizona Biennial this year?
And then Julie, if it's okay, can we, after Joe answers that last question, is it okay to transition to some Q&A from the audience? I've been collecting a bunch. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joe, do you want to start out about what are you looking at for?
Well, let me tell you what I'm looking at. I'm looking at non-art venues. I'm looking at there's this amazing place in West Cornwall, Connecticut, Michael Trapp Antiques. And it's this huge barn of beautiful old things. And to me, that's very compelling. I love to go there and just look at beautiful old things. The other places that I love to go to are like Ralph Pucci in Los Angeles and in New York, where I can see beautiful new things created by artists. So I'm not so much in the galleries as I am in these other kind of spaces. And then finally, the other place that I go for inspiration and ideas and fuel is the landscape. I go into the woods, the eastern forest, which is absolutely spectacular and particularly pleasant this time of year.
Your Instagram posts are my favorite because of those landscapes.
So
amazing.
I'm out there. I'm out there and in it.
Yeah.
Erin, what excites you? What are you looking at?
Lots of things everything excites me pretty much. There's so many interesting artists working out there that I'm just becoming aware of, or artists that I've been sort of a fangirl of for a long time that I'm seeing what they're doing new. And I think, to Joe's point, it's really important to explore art, not necessarily in the more quote unquote traditional venues, but to see where art is being created around us in different communities and different spaces. And being out in nature, I think, is really important just for anyone to have that space to really think and experience that part of existence as opposed to a more constructed existence in a city. You know, I do, like any millennial, I guess, I do use Instagram quite a bit. So I'm constantly seeing artists that I've worked with post other artists that they know, or, you know, just a sort of rabbit hole of finding all these amazing artists that without the internet, who knows if we would have ever crossed paths. You know, and, you know, sort of prior to the different reality that we live in now, with travel being a little different than it was about a year ago. You know, I do go and travel to different spaces, whether it's Santa Fe for market in the summer, or I'll go to New York, or I'll go to LA, or I'll go sort of regionally throughout the Southwest and meet with artists and talk with them. And I also always ask artists, like, what are you interested in? Like, you know, not, and also like, what curators are you interested in? Like, I don't want to just be like the curator who's like, oh, everyone's going to want to work with me. Like, I want to make sure that like artists are telling me what they want and what they're looking for in a curator, as opposed to me telling them what I'm looking for in an artist all the time.
Miki, what are you excited about?
I'm thinking about the artists that we're working with right now for that Undoing Time in particular, but I think that maybe it's because we're embedded at Arizona State University that I'm really interested in artists who have deep research and sort of archive and historical lenses to the work, that they're not making just work in their studio, but that they're really, really deeply embedded in ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're creating poetic gestures as a manifestation of those ideas. But I'd love to go into an artist like Zyberia Simmons, an artist I work very closely with, or Sandra De La Loza or Paul Rucker. These are artists that we're working with at the museum who spend their lives not just at the studio, but immersed in history and research and excavating stories and telling stories, many stories that have not been told, and disrupting narratives that have been, you know, passed along. And I'm really interested in how they do that, and how their work is so, you know, they're seekers, really. They're seekers, and it almost seems like their work is just a part of their practice. You know, reading, writing, being immersed in ideas is really who they are as entities, and that's, I find, very exciting.
Thank you. And before we open it up to some questions from the audience, I know it's been a while since you've seen some of those images, but Joe, what stood out to you in terms of some of the artists that were accepted in the biennial? I guess we did see a few of the, I don't know if we can go to some of the group shots. You didn't get to see it installed, but.
No, I did not, but you know, well, when my dear friend Julie got me involved in this, and like, oh my God, we're gonna do this via Zoom. I couldn't imagine how this process could work at all. And what happened through the course of that exercise is that these themes emerged rather magically, and that we could pair work, complementary work, and contrast work. And we even, through Zoom, sort of created a layout for the exhibit. And Erin and I were talking about this earlier. As a curator, I really like to be hands-on because I really care deeply how work is experienced within a space. It's got to look right. And that's, you know, it's a full range of work and all kinds of mediums, but it sort of all comes together, you know.
There were a lot of conversations between pieces, and it made you realize that people are thinking along same lines, and expressing it in entirely different ways, but they seem to connect. It makes for an exciting show.
Yeah, those connections, those narratives, they're all there.
So Mariana, do you have some good questions for us?
Sure, I've like paired a couple of them together.
Okay.
So one of the questions is, how does the curators identify contemporary art that should be in museums, and maybe those that they skip on? and kind of tandem with that question, when you're curating an exhibition, who do you consider to be your audience? So what are you identifying as contemporary art that you want to show in your space? And then who are you thinking about as your audience?
Those are good questions. Well, I'll just jump in and be brief. In terms of the first part of the question of what art are you identifying as work that you really want in the museum versus something that you would skip or not pursue. I think that there's a lot of context to that in terms of, you know, where's the museum located, what kind of artists or constituency groups are you working with. I'm also, I mean, of course, we do have a vast permanent collection here at the Herd, but I'm not necessarily a curator who has prioritized collecting, as I'm more of a sort of on the Kunsthalle side of things, where I'd rather just focus on exhibitions than really focusing on the collection. But can you repeat the second part of the question?
So who's your audience, Erin?
Who's our audience? I think, you know, that first and foremost is a conversation with the artists. You know, that's something that I'm always discussing with the artists of, you know, who is their audience? Who do they make their work for? Years ago when I was writing for Aslan Media, I had interviewed a few artists, and I remember talking once to Wafa Bilal, who's an Iraqi artist based in New York, and I asked him, who do you create your work for? And he said, I very much create it for an American audience as opposed to an Iraqi audience, because I want to demystify the experience of being an Iraqi person during US occupation of the Middle East. So I think that idea of who's our audience, first and foremost, is a conversation with the artist, and then also, you know, who's the sort of state or usual audience that an institution has, and how do you bring on new groups of people to come to the museum who maybe have never been to a museum before and it's their first time. So how do you create those gateways or access points for people to, you know, experience a museum exhibition for the first time?
That's good. Do you want to go to another question?
Does anybody else want to speak to that one? Do you want me to repeat it? I can go to a next one.
Go to the next.
Okay. So rather, and maybe Miki, this might be something that you kind of triggered a little in your statement, but rather than being in the moment as we respond to matters of diversity in the museum space, what enterprise-wide policy issues are being considered or implemented to ensure that there is a lasting systemic change within your respective institutions? That's a big one.
Yep.
But
yeah, it's the most important one when it comes to this kind of question.
It is.
You know, what we talk about, because you know, of course, I've seen all of these museum directors. If anyone reads the papers, every museum director and curator is being held to task about these questions. And of course, the answer is, let's put together an EDI committee and let's put out a plan and let's hire more diversity and let's hire a diversity person. And sort of that's where it kind of ends. Let's have a book club. And those are the kind of sort of answers that are all, again, incredibly noble and should be happening. But I always think about, well, what happens after I leave, or what happens after my curators leave? What are the sort of systemic policy changes that can really root themselves in an institution so that anyone who steps into this institution has to abide by certain ethics or values as it pertains to museums for all? And so in our case, one of the first places we've been starting is our collections committee and our like not very sexy, but, you know, registration, conservation, and collections, and rethinking about our collections. Like what does our permanent collection say about what's in our collection, you know, and whose stories are not there, whose stories aren't told, whose stories are put forward. And why were these works even put into the collection? Why are others not? And then also how, for example, in this art and focus gallery we had, we're now being really careful about gender. And if the artist, especially one who's passed away, only applying the gender, female or male, if the artist spoke of themselves in that way. And if we don't have that, then we will not put that. So really redoing the way our registrars enter information about their gender, or where they're from, things like that seem really important. Also, just things like intersectionality. Just because someone is from Latin America does not make them ethnic. There are lots of white people from Latin America. And so there's just a lot of really nuanced things that we're really making sure that our museum is minding and paying attention to, from those kinds of really not sexy worthy things, but that really are really important.
Yeah, the foundational things.
Absolutely.
Anybody, I see we lost Joe. I'm hoping maybe he'll reconnect. But Erin, do you want to speak to that? If there's anything you're doing at the Herd right now, and I know institutionally you guys have a little bit of a different focus, or I can go to a different question.
I mean, it's very early on in the conversations here at the museum, and I think that these are conversations that are long overdue, especially at a space like the Herd Museum. You know, so I think we're in the process of doing those sort of standard or sort of newly standard practices, like doing an EDI committee and doing these surveys from staff and how they view their role in the institution, how they're supported in the institution. But I definitely agree with Miki, is that the real structural change that has to happen isn't the flashy stuff that you can put on the front page of a newspaper, but it's, you know, like you said, the sort of unsexy work of looking at the politics of the archive, the politics of the collection. Why are certain things in there and certain things aren't? What are we prioritizing? What are we prioritizing in terms of scholarship that's accessible in the library? What are we prioritizing when we do get to exhibitions? You know, whose voices are being represented and who's telling those stories? Are they coming from those artists? Are they coming from those communities? Or are they being refracted through a Eurocentric lens of art history and art appreciation? So sort of, you know, tackling a lot of those issues internally, I think, is really the way forward to be able to show up and be accountable to diverse communities.
I'm going to ask another question that's really connected to this, and we might have already touched on it, but just because it's important. So one of the worst represented groups in the U.S. art world are women of color. We make up, and this is a woman of color who's asking the question, we make up just 1% of the artists in major collections, despite the fact that we account for 20% of the U.S. population. What do you think are necessary steps that should be taken both by artists and organizations to reach true parity and true representation, so our voices can be heard as well? And I think you guys both spoke to this, like these collection plans and really internally looking, but maybe also what are some stopgaps you're looking at until those collection plans really can take place?
Miki, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, yes, there absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I know that there are, if you've heard of Time's Up, in the film industry, there are a group of curators and directors, Time's Up 2020 Women in the Arts, who've been working and who will be announcing very shortly a kind of a memo for museums to try to aspire to in terms of gender parity, because it's, of course, not just, again, as I say, it's not just in the exhibitions, it's our curators, our educators, finance people, people who work in the museums who are women. There's a lot of issues with gender parity just behind the scenes as well. Directors of major institutions. So it really is systemic. You know, I think what you see in the gallery walls is an extension of a complete system of power. And so it's all interconnected. But there's also rapid response collecting. We're thinking about doing something, fundraising around creating immediate acquisitions funds to immediately collect women of color and BIPOC artists, and to especially around the issues around Black Lives Matter and what's happening today, so that we have this as part of our archive. Some of the things from our pilot projects. So it is, as I've been saying, it's not just art on a wall. it's everything that leads to making that art on the wall happen.
I very
I'd like
much
to,
agree. Oh, go
I'd like,
ahead.
oh, go ahead. Who's,
Oh, no, you go ahead, Julie.
oh, no, I was going to shift questions if you have more to finish on that one.
Oh, just agreeing that, you know, it's how do you get to that final sort of stage, if you want to call it that, of when the art is installed and who the artists are, but, you know, what are those dynamics within the institution, and not only with the staff, but on steering committees, the board of directors, who are those individuals making decisions for that institution. And, you know, I think in some ways museums are being reactive to the moment right now, but how do we carry this on, like Miki said, in a sustainable way, where it's not just this moment where museums are saying, oh, we should collect more women, or we should collect more BIPOC artists, and not to just do that because it's what people are doing right now, but because it's important. And those are huge gaps within many collections. So it's how do you do that in a sustainable way, in an ongoing, you know, sort of in perpetuity.
Great, thanks. All right,
Well, and then, of course, you work at a museum that's dedicated to Indigenous peoples, correct? And Joe, yours is it beyond the Delaware? Is it beyond the Lenape? What is the mission of your institution, Joe?
Well, that is currently up for discussion, in that the museum board is rethinking the mission of the institution. But primarily, it's to tell the story of the Pequot people. And it's primarily in place to serve their community. But you know, this thing about museums, they are political entities. We can't get around that. And in order for systematic change to occur, I think the whole system has to be challenged. How these institutions are governed, what the board of directors, what is their interface, what power dynamics are at play there. And I've often found, you know, if you're in the job market and you're looking at positions, you know, there's some real buzzwords that come up. They're looking for a visionary director or a visionary curator. They're looking for innovation and change. And my experience has been, they're looking for that. If they identify and hire someone who is there to make that occur, and it does happen, the minute that person, that energy leaves the institution, they have a tendency to go back to where they started. It's like a rubber band. They stretch, they return. So I think the real key here is how do you get the stretch? How do you take a very elitist system and you know, require that it take risk? How does it flex and stretch and then stay? That to me is the puzzling question. I don't know how it's done, but I think we have to move in that direction. We have to challenge how museums are governed, and what kind of, you know, how they're involved in placemaking for the communities they serve.
I think that's really, really important to say, because it's also, you know, this idea of status quo thinking, where this is how museums have always done it, so this is how museums should always do it. And I think that that's really what needs to be undone and rethought, and this hierarchical structure needs to be refit in some way. And that idea of creative placemaking, but also creative placekeeping, and realizing that there are creative communities in these various geographic locations, sort of like we were speaking to earlier, with artists being priced out of major urban centers like New York and LA. And I think, you know, here in the Southwest, here in Phoenix, as more people are moving to this area, is how do we keep the creative community that's already here safe and supported, while we also welcome in new people to be part of that community and create more diversity and energy and conversation and that sort of syzygy of people coming together. But there has to be some sort of ethical moving forward of the community to make sure that artists here don't get priced out, you know, because I feel like artists are constantly having to move, because as soon as they go into an area and that area creates this artistic energy, then, you know, that's when the real estate developers go in and want to, you know, capitalize off of that. So how do you protect the artistic communities that are very much living, especially right now, during this global pandemic, who have been hit very hard, both visual artists and performing artists? How do we support them moving forward?
So, Julie, I know you wanted to change direction a little, and I think this question is going to do it. But kind of jumping off of what Erin, you just said, thinking about now when we're thinking about creative placemaking or creative placekeeping, maybe even peacekeeping, what are you thinking about in terms of criteria to select an artwork or artists you're working with who are getting showcased in your exhibitions right now? Like what is that you're looking for? What advice can you give to all those artists maybe that are on this call and or webinar and listening to the conversation? Another big question. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to ask like the huge ones.
The big ones.
Even if you just reduce it to what advice would you give?
Yeah.
There's a lot of artists who are watching today and a lot of artists who didn't get in. So any advice you can give to them to either encourage or direct them so that they are potentially looked at the next time or for other exhibitions.
Keep showing up.
Yep.
Keep showing up. I think that's key. Don't be discouraged. What artists, art making, the arts, the practice of art it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to sustain in our society, and you just have to stick with it and keep showing up.
I agree. And I think it's really important for artists to not bend their creative practice to fit what a curator is maybe looking for.
Right.
Just because maybe one artist's practice doesn't necessarily align with my curatorial practice doesn't mean that artist needs to shift their work to fit into that. I think that there are so many curators out there and so many artists, and it's all about relationships and trust building with, I think it's a really important relationship between a curator and an artist and how they communicate and build together. Like when I was working with Maria Hutfield on her solo show, it was really important for both of us to have that trust relationship in one another. Because it is a very intimate relationship between you and your artist. You're working with their creative thought, their process. So I think it's really important for artists to focus on their work and what they are wanting to do and communicate and say, and not necessarily change it because something might be trending, whatever, trends in the art world, but really stay true to their voice and how they're responding to the world around them.
Not to mention that sometimes we as curators stumble upon some art that we weren't necessarily looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and it changes everything. You're inspired by their work and create an exhibition after seeing something. So I think be true to yourself and keep doing it. And I will say, one of the questions we used to always include in the biennial, the critical eye, was, is it important for an artist to have a website? And I personally think that Instagram has taken over a lot of that, but a backup website is always good. But you have to let people know what you're doing, because there are fewer and fewer galleries and art venues. So the way to show people is electronically these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Julie, did you have another question you were thinking about asking?
Actually, that
was it?
Answered, yeah. So
Okay.
I think there's a few more people asking questions. So
Yeah. Let me take a look. I'm just trying to get them all. Are there any, maybe thinking about installation artists, and I know, Erin, you spoke a little bit of scale. So like recommendations for how that kind of installation or land-based art might get noticed within museums, and how that fits within your guys' agenda? Any advice there? I know that you were talking about in your exhibition, Erin, that there are scale-based, like large-scale installations, and Miki, you had mentioned that also coming up.
I'll address it just to get the ball rolling.
Sure.
You know, the problem with installations, it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You can't just start doing large scale installations unless you have a place to show it or some funding. So you either have to help to create a location and then some kind of infrastructure to get the word out, and then potentially be left with how to store it or how to dismantle it. But if that's what you want to be known for, then you've got to find ways to get your work in front of people so that they'd be inspired by your proposal. So like the Biennial, people did propose ideas, and if it was interesting enough to Joe, we gave them the space and the shot. But you have to be willing to create your own opportunity to get people's attention. You can't expect people to approach you for something you've never done before and say, would you do this, unless your work is already getting noticed for what it is before the installations, in my opinion.
Yeah.
No, I think so. And I think to your point it is, I think, especially when you're working in large scale installation or you're proposing something that has a certain amount of site specificity to it, it is, and I think maybe some institutions are reticent to sign on to that, especially if that artist hasn't necessarily done that before. What's it going to turn out like? But I think it's really important for curators and directors and education staff within the institutions to support that risk taking and you know, encourage that. And that's not to say that you know, a stretched canvas or a photograph doesn't hold the same weight as an installation piece. They all are they all hold amazing dialogues and narratives, but I think it's really important if someone is working in that format of large scale. It's like, again, building that trust with the artist, having conversations, and just, you know, if it doesn't go well, then I guess it doesn't go well. But that's okay. I think it's really something that I've seen in the last few years, because I've also worked as an art critic as well as a curator. Is that some institutions, even in the big sort of urban centers, they stick with a sort of safe or state approach, and that risk taking, for whatever reason, if this is coming from the boards or it's, you know, the directors of those institutions, they're just afraid to step too far outside of their normal. But I think it's really important, and if it fails, it fails. I think failure is a really important part of the artistic practice. I mean, I've done some stuff where I'm like, oh, that did not turn out how I thought it was going to. But it doesn't, you know, I don't think that's a bad thing.
I would agree with that. I think, you know, failure is sometimes the best teacher, and it allows us to really go beyond that point of failure and to discover new things about ourselves, about other people, about the institution itself. So I think taking risk, and with that understanding that you might fall on your face, is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And then there's the large element of where do you get the funding for the large scale pieces or pieces off site? Funding something that's not even near your institution, is that a risk you're willing to take, or can you find the funding? It's not like those things are low budget add-ons. You know, someone's got to pay for all the materials and the time. So for curators, it's not always just you get what you want. You have to write grants or pitch the show and find the funding to make it happen.
I was going to say that also about the question about, you know, if you didn't make it to the biennial, because so often what isn't seen, because I think museums are shrouded in mystery, and I wish we could be more transparent, but what isn't seen is how often we get rejected, how many grants we things we write, how many times we are not getting, you know, that show that didn't travel, or that artist that we wanted that didn't work out. You know, there's so much failure is just a part of, I worked with the artist Sanford Biggers, and he spoke to a group of young artists, and he said, if I'm not regularly getting rejected, then I'm not doing work. I'm not working.
Yeah.
It's part of always putting yourself out there, is to always be, you're going to say, some are going to say yes and some are going to say no. And if you're not getting any no's, that means you're probably not putting yourself out there enough. And certainly we have to do that. And I think the other thing to circle back to one of your questions, Julie, about what has this pandemic and time taught us, is that museums, the way we were founded was to just show the finished product, just to show the object, the trove of collections that the robber barons amassed, and so it was just this, like, these objects in and of themselves. But because of the times have changed, and thankfully, because of living artists, they've really changed the way museums have to do business, which is to really focus more on the creative process than the end result. And what's really been great for us with Zoom is that we realize that what curators do, and again, shrouded in secrecy, people don't really know what curators do. And one of the things that we get to do is we get the magic of living and being in artist studios. Many artist studios. And so by the time and it's a great question about audience too, because I always tell my staff, like, you have to put yourself in the position of someone who hasn't been in the artist studio like you have, or hasn't done 2 years worth of research like you have. And I'm constantly telling my curators, like, things that other people don't know. You have to get out of that brain set. But because we get to be in these artist studios, and we get to see what they're drinking and what they're listening to and what they're eating and what their kids running in and out, and the books and where they live and where their coffee shop is, all of that stuff is so much a part of that object that's on the wall. We've been doing these things called couch coffee culture, where we've been zooming into the studios of our artists in Paris and Mexico City and San Antonio and in Appalachia, North Carolina, and all these different places where they're taking our audiences into those studios. And it's one of the things museums are terrible at, is really kind of peeling back what has made our careers so incredibly purposeful and amazing. And we just haven't done a good job of being able to translate all of that richness into the cold white spaces. So we continue to perpetuate this very, like, objet on the wall mystique, when it's really so much messier and richer and cooler, the way that we're looking at art. And so hopefully this pandemic will teach at least us at the ASU Art Museum a little bit more about how we can broaden that magic that we know and live.
So I promised everybody that we would wrap up at 3:30. So if anybody has any last concluding thoughts, this is your moment on the panel. So Joe, Erin, Miki, Julie, anything else you want to add?
I was just reading some of the last questions to see if there was a real pressing one. Are curators relevant? Are we even relevant anymore? So much is being talked about of having non-curators organize exhibitions, or artists. Do we still have something to offer? And what would you give in the way of advice to someone who is interested in the curatorial field?
Jump in there, get involved, do it.
Yeah.
I think that they're necessary. I mean, it's the same thing that librarians are being asked now that there's no books, but what librarian really is someone who points us to information and how to get information, how to think about the information. And I think that curators in many ways with art have the same process. It's really about people who can be our guides, who can teach us to think, help us think and understand work, and people who are devoting their entire lives to the purposes of looking and seeing and being artists have something very valuable to contribute, I think. Self-serving.
I definitely agree with that, though. I think that it, I think maybe historically this idea that curators are maybe somehow gatekeepers to the institution or to exhibitions, I think that, like like Miki said, like to demystify what curators actually do, because I can't tell you like how many dates I've been on where someone's like, what's a curator? You know, so there, it's definitely not something that everybody necessarily understands. And, you know, sometimes I'm even like, what do we all do? What's our purpose? What is our role here? Because I think it's also constantly in flux. But I think that it's, you know, kind of also to what Miki was saying, we get rejected all the time too. And sometimes by even the institutions we work with, like I pitch shows here at the museum that sometimes they don't happen, and for lots of reasons, you know, but it's not like we get, you know, we don't have the final say in anything as curators. You know, there is a whole framework of decision making within the institution, and that also includes the artist. And I kind of look at my role not only as an interpreter and as a scholar and as a writer, but as an accomplice to these artists, to get their work shown and to have it shown in the way in which they want it shown, and their dialogue represented on the gallery wall. You know, so I think that curators are, especially now, attendant to being advocates for artists from different communities.
I agree with that. I think the curatorial field has changed in recent years, and to use Miki's word, which I like very much, it's much messier than it has been in the past. I think I would say that curators traditionally have been gatekeepers, and I think the whole practice is in flux and is changing. And I think it's much more real today, much more exciting. It's much more diverse than it's ever been.
Great.
Well, I want to thank you all. Mariana, you did a tremendous job. I learned a lot, and makes me proud to be among you. And our exhibition, the Arizona Biennial 2020, is up till January 10th. We welcome you all. We are open Thursday through Sundays, time tickets, registering online. I couldn't be more happy with this panel. Thank you very much. And do check out the wonderful exhibition at the Herd and all the great shows happening at ASU. And Joe, when do you open back up? Are you?
The museum will open April 2021.
2021, so field trip. Maybe we'll be traveling by
Come on
then.
out. Come on.
And do check out, speaking of the messy side or the behind the scenes, we did a lot of time-lapse installation videos of many of the installations in the biennial, and those are on our website. And over time, we'll be doing some narrating of the artist statements this year. So again, these are all new things that we've been doing because we have to get creative, and it has been absolutely wonderful to see how much more the Phoenix Art Museum has been focusing on artists from the region, how much we see that the biennial is still important to the Tucson Museum of Art and the community. And everybody keep doing the great work you're doing. I'm very proud of you all.
Julie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
One last thing
Get it,
to
Joe.
all the Venetians. I'm co-curating an exhibition of the work of Leon Polk-Smith to open at the Herd Museum in Phoenix in February. So I hope that COVID will allow us to all get together at that time. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And
All right.
congratulations to the artists. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you, artists.
Thank you.
Thanks, Denise.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.